local woman twice his age. Even though it was still dark outside, I heard an alarm clock ringing in the next bedroom and the sound of my stepson Casey getting himself up and ready to leave. A few minutes later, the front door clicked and off he went on his fishing trip. Casey loved being outdoors. Most teenage boys were lounging around in bed, but not Casey. When he wasn't fishing, he'd be out with his mates. He was always on the go and always with a smile on his face. I'd met Graham in 2012. He'd raised Casey, then 14, and his other children, Molly, Connor and James, on his own, with help from his parents and his sister Denise. Together with my own children, Alex and Charlie, we became a family. As the eldest, Casey looked out for everybody. He always had lots of time for the younger kids, teaching them to ride bikes or play football. He loved exploring the woods behind our home with his mates and had so many friends. He was a talented footballer and played in the academy for Everton. He and Graham were big fans, so it was like a dream come true when he was offered a place there. Casey's photo even featured on a billboard at the club, and Graham was so proud. After turning 16, Casey and his friends started going out together, but Casey never once got drunk. They'd tease him because he'd only ever ordered lemonade. At my 30th birthday party, he tried a cider but said it made him sick. I just don't like the taste of alcohol, he shrugged. He was so committed to his football, he didn't really see the attraction in partying. Casey was such a good role model for the younger ones, happy-go-lucky, but kind-hearted and sensible. He was never any trouble at all. Then, aged 18, his first serious relationship finished. He and his girlfriend had met at school and been together for 2 years, so the breakup hit Casey hard. We kept a close eye on him and he stayed busy with fishing and football. He had various jobs as well. Then, aged 19, Casey made an announcement. "I've got a girlfriend," he said. We were pleased at first, until he admitted he was seeing a woman called Natalie Bennett. She was twice Casey's age, a mother of 4, and well known on our estate. She was bad news, so we were stunned. "This isn't a good idea," Graham said eventually. "She's not right for you." But Casey wouldn't listen. We hoped he'd see sense, but he was absolutely besotted with her. Graham was really worried and pleaded with Casey to finish it. "Natalie says you don't love me and you don't want me to be happy," he said. "That's why you don't approve of her." We knew she was playing mind games and manipulating him because he was vulnerable and immature. As he spent more time with her, his character slowly started to change. Casey started drinking and we suspected he was taking drugs with her. He even stopped going fishing. It was heartbreaking. Yet each time we tried to talk about it with him, we felt we were pushing him further away from us and further towards Natalie. "We're playing right into her hands," Graham said. Next, we tried tough love, telling Casey we wouldn't support him if he carried on seeing her. But Natalie's response was simply to invite him to live with her instead. We felt we couldn't win. In desperation, Graham went to see Natalie himself. I asked her politely to leave him alone and find someone more suitable, someone her own age, Graham said, but she said it was none of my business. Then Casey came home with a black eye. Walked into a door, he mumbled without looking at us, but we knew he was lying. A couple of weeks later, he had a bruise on his cheek, and then another black eye. Fell off my bike she was cutting him off from his old life. The light was gone from his eyes, Graham said sadly. One day, Casey's sister Molly said to him, "You have to leave her, she's going to kill you." Her words sent a chill through us all, but we knew she was right. By March 2023, Casey, 24, and Natalie had been together on and off for almost 5 years. For a few days at the start of the month, Casey stayed with the family and he seemed much better. He announced he'd found a new job as a delivery driver. We even dared to hope this might be his way out of the relationship. But one evening, I was at work managing a local pub when Graham called. "Casey's been stabbed," he gasped. "We need to get to the hospital." When I arrived, Graham was already there with other relatives. Doctors told us Casey had been stabbed twice and needed urgent surgery to repair his heart. It was such a shock, we couldn't take it in. Yet, at the same time, we knew immediately who was responsible without even asking. The police confirmed Casey had been found outside Natalie's home. Casey underwent surgery and was then placed in an induced coma. His body seemed to be coping well, and we were hopeful he'd make a good recovery. Each day, there was a constant stream of family and friends visiting and wishing him well. He was loved by so many people, and Graham never left his bedside. A week later, the doctors tried to wake Casey from the sedation, but each time he began having seizures. They tried again the next day, and the next, but his seizures had got worse. Casey was taken for a brain scan, and afterwards, his consultant took us aside. "I'm so sorry. Casey has severe brain damage, and there is no hope of recovery," he said. We were devastated. It was heartbreaking. Having believed he was doing well after surgery, to have him so cruelly snatched away. But we also knew Casey wouldn't want to exist in a coma, unable to run around and live his life to the full. Graham had to make the horrendous decision to withdraw life support. In the hours afterwards, the hospital was flooded with family and friends who wanted to say goodbye. He was expected to pass soon after, but he lasted for 35 hours. The doctors said he was so young and healthy, he was fighting to stay alive as long as he could. We didn't leave him for a moment, and his friends came and slept on the floor and in the waiting rooms. Casey passed away on the 31st of March, just 1 week before his 25th birthday. We were numb with grief. We organised a wonderful send-off with over 1,000 mourners at his funeral. People lined the streets and local shops shut as a mark of respect. Casey's coffin was carried by horse and carriage. Afterwards, we threw a party with a singer and dancing. Casey would have loved it, but our lives were in tatters. Natalie Bennett, 47, stood trial in November 2023 at Liverpool Crown Court. She denied murdering Casey and instead tried to pin the blame on him, telling various lies. She said that he'd attacked her, that he was a drug dealer, and that he'd arrived at her home already injured. She even told 999 operators she had no idea how he had come by his injuries. But footage clearly showed Bennett failing to help as he lay dying on her path. She even aimed a further blow with the knife at his head. Doorbell footage recovered from a neighbour's house showed Bennett holding a knife to the head of the distraught and injured Mr. Anderson with her right hand and using it to either strike Casey Anderson in the head or at the very least hold it close to his head. Bennett showed no reaction as she was handed a life imprisonment with a minimum term of 18 years behind bars. But she put her thumb up to her dad in the public gallery as she was led down to the cells. Sentencing which you thrust at him, then a knife, which you used to cause slash wounds to his ear, back and left arm, and to stab him in the chest and lower left leg. You continued to be aggressive, making a sharp stabbing motion towards him close to his head, and you called him a rat. The value of a human life and the value of Casey's life can never be measured by the length of the sentence passed. I have read all of the victims' statements. They were without exception moving tributes to a much-loved son, family member and friend. This was a situation in which you grossly overreacted during the course of an argument. Self-defense was completely rejected as entirely unconvincing. I'm sure that you attacked him, that he tried to defend himself. That made you so angry that you picked up a screwdriver and then the knife. No sentence I can pass can restore Casey's life. His friends and family will always mourn his death. Your actions have caused the waste of a human life. And it's true, we'll never forget our brilliant boy. Graham says, we were disappointed by the sentence. Whatever she serves, she'll still have years left to rebuild her life, while Casey's life and my family's lives are shattered. We've built a memorial garden outside the house with a bench, and almost every day Casey's friends come to sit and be close to him. He was a really lovely lad with his whole life to look forward to, but she stole him from us. If there is anyone out there fighting a battle with domestic abuse, man or woman, speak out and get help. Don't leave it too late. Speaking up is not a weakness, it's the biggest strength you can show. Please don't let your families go through what we are going through. Shoe fetish killer. Tracy's mum was home alone when an evil stranger came knocking. Checking my watch, I realised I had time to call my mum before I left work. I thought it might be you, she said when she answered the phone. You're a creature of habit, just like me. We both laughed. She and I were so similar, and so close too. A single parent, my mum, Wendy Speaks, had put everything she could into raising me and my sister. She worked 2 jobs as an office manager and then waitressing at the weekends. We didn't have a lot of money, but we had lots of fun. During the summers of my childhood, we'd had days out to Scarborough and Whitby. Mum always got stuck in, building sandcastles and paddling, and then she'd buy us fish and chips on the way home. We're happy, and that's all that matters, Mum would say. We're the 3 musketeers. In time, I met someone, and Mum walked me down the aisle on our wedding day. Although I moved to Essex afterwards and she stayed in Wakefield, West Yorkshire, shock, I called my husband, who rushed home from work, and called the officer back. The news couldn't have been any worse. "I'm sorry, Tracy," he said, tearily as he put the phone down. "Your mum is dead." In that moment, my world fell to pieces. In a daze, we made the 4.5-hour journey to Wakefield. Mum was only 51, with so much to look forward to. How could she be dead? Arriving at her house, we were met by an investigating officer. He explained that Mum's colleagues had found her body in an upstairs bedroom. She'd been raped and stabbed to death. Her killer had tied her up and forced her to wear a pair of women's shoes which did not belong to her. Downstairs, all her shoes were scattered around. One pair was on the dressing table. Another pair was missing, taken by her killer as a trophy, the police said. It felt as if I was in a horror film. "Did your mum have any enemies?" the officers asked. "Did she have a boyfriend? Any relationship problems?" Numb with shock, I shook my head. "She was so kind, she didn't have a single enemy," I replied. "She was single and happy that way." Our entire family and friendship group had to be fingerprinted and eliminated. The killer left a fingerprint in the blood from a rare blood group on the door, and there was DNA from the rape. A witness As a result, the parole board concluded Farrow was not ready to be released. It was a relief, but only a temporary one. He was up for parole every 2 years, and each time it was refused. I'm already preparing my campaign for his next application. I believe there must be others out there who he had targeted, and I would ask them to come forward to the safety of other women. He is a twisted, evil monster, a danger to society, and he should never be allowed out. I couldn't bear for another family to suffer as we have. Killed as she walked home. Chelsea had a night out with friends and never came back. Chelsea Bruck was a quiet, shy girl who preferred to blend into the background rather than stand out. One Halloween, Chelsea, 22, decided to celebrate with some friends. In her area, every year, a local musician would throw a huge party and guests would flock in a fancy dress to dance and drink until the early hours. Chelsea had handmade her costume especially for the event. She decided to go as the comic villain Poison Ivy from the film Batman and Robin, and she'd attached green leaves to the top and chosen black leggings and planned on completing the look by covering her blonde hair with a black and dark red wig. Unlike the cold-hearted character Poison Ivy, Chelsea was a compassionate homebody who lived with her parents. The youngest of 5 siblings, she worked as a waitress at a local restaurant. She loved to bake and had started to look into doing a culinary degree. On the night, Chelsea got a lift with a friend to the large rural property where the Halloween party was being held. At the event, she laughed with friends and danced to live music. At around 3 AM, she was offered several lifts home, but she refused them and left. A friend revealed that Chelsea was there 1 minute and then she wasn't. Chelsea never made it home. She simply vanished. The next day, Chelsea's parents reported her missing. A missing person search began and the whole community turned out to help the police. Posters were put up everywhere and leaflets were distributed with her picture on. As her family pleaded for her safe return, a reward of £14,000 was offered for any information about Chelsea's disappearance, which later rose to £24,000. Party guests were questioned, but they could only remember Chelsea leaving with an unidentified man, and detectives had no real leads. Someone at the party said they saw Chelsea walking towards the parking area at 3 AM with a man wearing dark green glasses and a black hooded sweatshirt. A composite sketch was immediately drawn up by investigators and released. Then a woman called Kerry Ann Carr came forward. She claimed to cops that her ex-boyfriend said he had murdered Chelsea. But when the cops looked into the claims, they found no evidence and said that she had fabricated the story to get her ex in trouble for a crime he didn't commit. Then a man named Harlan Bird told police he saw 2 men harassing Chelsea at the party, who then drove off with her. But cops said his story too costume, torn pieces of her top, and ripped leggings. Weeks later, construction workers excavating a secluded property found the naked body of a young woman in the woodland near train lines around 12 miles from where the Halloween party had been held. Dental records confirmed it was Chelsea. According to police reports, Chelsea's body was nude and partially Smiling cheerfully into the camera, the retired army officer and accountant looked at the picture of happiness. Penelope and David had been married for 24 years, and he was her fourth husband. She had married builder Melvin Porter when she was just 17, and had daughters Rebecca and Victoria in 1973 and 1977. But 2 years later the couple split. A short-lived marriage to civil servant Tony Rothwell followed in 1981. Then in 1988, Penelope wed RAF engineer Alan Warrender, and they had a daughter Isabel. But in the early 1990s, Penelope met David while working at an army base, and the pair embarked on an affair. When Alan discovered Penelope's infidelity in 1993, it sparked a fight between the two men, and she told Alan the marriage was over. But tragically, just a few days later, the 43-year-old took his own life. Heartbreakingly, the inquest ruled he killed himself due to marital stress, and Penelope later admitted in court that it had happened because she'd slept with David. David was also married at the time to a woman called Sheila Taylor, with whom he had a son and 2 daughters. They too split up, and Penelope and David got married, but tragedy struck when David's son Gavin killed himself, and it emerged that he had penned a suicide note saying he didn't want to be like his father. Broken by his loss, grief-stricken David became aggressive towards Penelope. Isabel said she saw him pin her mother against a wall, giving her a bloody nose. It also emerged he had held a knife to Penelope's throat at a family barbecue, after she said, "Killing yourself is stupid," in front of Gavin's widow. But David sought grief counselling, and the couple appeared to move on, seemingly making the most of life. Photos showed them soaking up the sun abroad as they spent weeks at their holiday home near Bergerac, France. They also enjoyed dinner parties and gardening at their bungalow in Barrow, Somerset. But while friends believed they were largely happy, their relationship was fractious. They bickered over small things such as burning the dinner, and there was occasional talk about divorce. Then, just before Christmas in 2020, the pair argued over a TV remote control. It culminated in Penelope locking David in the conservatory, then calling the police when he smashed his way out using a poker. Her computer search history showed she researched domestic violence refugees later that night. 2 months later, the couple sat down to a 4-hour gourmet dinner to celebrate Penelope's 66th birthday. The crab, lobster and steak dinner was a lavish lockdown treat from Isabel, who joined them on a Zoom alongside her husband Tom. Penelope and David drank cocktails and champagne, but the celebrations turned sour when they quarrelled as she served Bubble and Squeak alongside the steak. Later, they bickered over who should have charged the iPad they were using, and Isabel ended the call. Shortly after 8 p.m, Isabel rang her mother, and Penelope reassured her she was absolutely fine. But just over an hour later, she slashed David across his chest with an 8-inch filleting knife. He dialed 999, but she stabbed him twice more in the abdomen before picking up the phone. Speaking in a calm voice, Penelope told the operator, concern. I have taken so much abuse over the years. Look at my records in Germany. But he was a good daddy. However, the mask slipped tonight, and that was unforgivable. I accept my punishment. May he rot in hell. When police arrived at the scene, they handcuffed Penelope and led her away in her pyjamas. Police video footage showed her repeatedly asking for her coat and saying, "I stabbed him. He's an aggressive bully and nasty. I've had enough," when he said, "You wouldn't do it. I did it twice more." Despite her candid confession, Penelope later denied murder, pleading guilty to manslaughter instead. And when her case came to trial at Bristol Crown Court, she told jurors she hadn't intended to kill David, but had lost the plot after decades of physical and emotional abuse. She claimed that she had been throttled on cruise ships, strangled in a row over coffee, and headbutted out of the blue. She also claimed that his jealousy had led her to getting a tattoo above her right buttock, which said "Property of David John Jackson." However, other testimonies painted a different picture. Sheila, David's previous wife, said it was in fact David who was frightened of Penelope. She said that Penelope loved to make him squirm with embarrassment, and that she'd even threatened to cut off his penis if he ever left her. But Isabel described a mostly idyllic family life with two fantastic parents who had a mostly loving relationship. The jury spent nearly 11 hours deliberating before returning a verdict of murder. The judge sentenced Penelope to life in prison with a minimum term of 18 years and said that she had shown not a shred of remorse for the killing. After the sentencing, Isabel said in a statement, "I have lost the man I looked up to and loved. I have lost the man that was always there for me no matter what. The man that came and fixed things in my house, which I didn't know even needed fixing. The man that could make me laugh. But I feel I have also lost my mum. I have lost the woman who always knew how to make me feel better. The woman who was my friend, my champion and my support. The woman who cared for and cherished and loved me." Isabel added, "Yes, I know Mum is here, but she's not the same person I knew. However, I love both of them. I always have and always will." The killer clown, jumped in his car and tried to chase down the clown's vehicle, but he was unable to catch up. Meanwhile, Marlene was rushed to hospital for emergency surgery, but she never regained consciousness. 2 days later, the family made the difficult decision to take her off life support. The devoted mum was just 40 years old, but Tood had a reason to kill her. Cops started digging, but forensically there wasn't much left at the scene in terms of fingerprints or DNA. As with most investigations, they turned the spotlight on Marlene's family. Marlene Warren had an interesting backstory. She had been a struggling single mum of 2 boys when she'd met Michael, the man who she'd gone on to marry. Michael took on the boys as if they were his own, and over the years the family had built up a successful car sales business and property empire. Marlene helped with the businesses, especially with managing the couple's properties. Now, the family lived in the lap of luxury, even owning a small plane. Police questioned Michael and asked if his late wife had any known enemies. The widower proposed that a disgruntled tenant could have been responsible for Marlene's murder, as occasionally she would have to carry out evictions. However, Joe thought this was extremely unlikely, given that his mother was empathetic to tenants who were in arrears. Soon, cops focused their attention on Michael himself. When asked about his whereabouts on the morning of the shooting, he had a sound alibi, saying he'd been on his way to a horse racing track with some friends. There was no way he could have been the clown killer. But police couldn't ignore the red flags surrounding Michael. Before her untimely death, Marlene had confided in Joe and her mother that she didn't trust her husband. Shockingly, she told them separately that if anything were to happen to her, Mike would be responsible. It was a shocking admission that investigators couldn't ignore. Looking into the family's history, police discovered that a couple of years earlier they'd experienced a tragedy. Joe's brother John had tragically died in a car accident. Instead of rallying together, Marlene and Michael had pulled apart in their grief. Speaking to Michael's employees at Bargain Motors, his second-hand car dealership, a discovery was made. When interviewing staff, a name kept cropping up: Sheila Keane. It was an open secret that Sheila and Michael were having an affair. They were definitely seeing each other. Employee Della Ward said, "You knew the way she looked at Michael, she loved him. You could see it." Sheila was described by her workmates as bubbly, but also tough, as part of her role at Bargain Motors was repossessing cars. She even kept a gun to hand for her own protection. The workers described her friends finally had some closure. Despite initially assuming the killer was a man, he said, "Sheila Keane was the murderer of my mother. I was there, I saw her eyes, and I'll tell you, they're the eyes. I'll never forget them." Sheila was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Michael was never charged in connection with Marlene's murder. A few days after the plea deal was finalised, Joe visited his mother's grave to give her a message. "I was telling her we finally got the truth," he said.